So, good morning to all the students to be present here. And today we were discussed about the types of Airblast circuit breaker. And if you remember in my previous lecture, we would start basically the Airblast circuit breaker, and you can see that in case of Airblast circuit breaker, when the arc is generated between the two contacts, that is the moving contact and the fixed contact, we have to remove this arc, or we have to quench this arc. And for quenching this arc or for removing this arc, we are just providing a blow of you can say that air, or a flow of a heat, sorry, a flow of air. And due to this blow of air, or you can say that blow of air, your arc will be quenched. So when the arc will be quenched, we have classified the air blast circuit breaker into three types, that is called as axial blast, the cross blast, and the radial blast. So we were also discussed in my previous lecture that in case of axial blast, the blast is directed along the arc path, means in the path where the arc will generate, the a blow of air is also travel toward this path. We have a cross blast, and in case of a cross blast, what will happen? We are blowing the air at a perpendicular or a right angle to the length of the air, length of the arc path. And we have a radial blast, and in case of a radial blast, the blast is directed radially, so that the arc will be quenching within a minimum possible shortest time. And the temperature inside the contacts of the circuit breaker cannot exceed a particular value, because if the temperature or the heat generated between the two contacts exceed a particular value, then it will affect the system as well as it will affect the circuit breaker. So you have to be quench this arc in a minimum possible shortest time. The moment when you have the arc will generate, you have to quench this arc. So this is all about, you can say that about the different types of circuit breaker. So if we talk about the number one circuit breaker, that is called as axial blast circuit breaker. As I had already tell you that in case of axial blast, the blast of the air is in the same direction as in the direction of the arc. Means whenever the very heavy current flows through the circuit breaker starts operating, and its moving contact is pulled apart from the fixed contact. And when the contacts are moved apart, then there is an arc struck between these two contacts, and you have to struck this an arc. So if the blast of the air is in the same direction as the direction of the arc, then it is called as axial blast circuit breaker. So what will happen in case of axial blast circuit breaker? Under normal conditions, the fixed and the moving contacts are held in close position with the help of spring pressure. There is an air reservoir connecting to the arcing chamber through an air valve. The air valve controls the flow of the air into the arcing chamber, and the valve is closed under normal conditions. That means it can be seen that when there is no fault occur in the system, in that case, your moving part as well as the fixed contact part are close together, and there is no arc stuck between them. And in between, there is we can say that an arcing chamber where the arc is basically generated. And this arc, when the arc is generated between this chamber, so in addition to that thing, we are just providing a air blast valve, and this air blast valve is closed at the time of healthy condition. That means at the time of non-faulty conditions, this air valve is closed. But what will happen when the fault occurs? The very heavy current flows through the circuit breaker, due to which the electromagnet or the electromagnetic coil get energized. When these coils get energized, what will happen? It will move the moving contact with the fixed contact. And when it will remove the moving contact with the fixed contact, an arc is stuck between them. So when the arc will be struck in between this moving as well as the fixed contact, so you have to quench this arc in a minimum possible shortest time. So what will happen? The fault occur a tripping impulse the produced, which causes the opening of the air valve. So question is, whenever there is a fault occur in the system, whenever there is a moving contact get separated from the fixed contact, so it causes opening of the air valve. Since the air valve connects the air reservoir and the arcing chamber, a very high pressure of the air is entered into the arcing chamber. And when very high air get enter into the arcing chamber, this air pushes away the moving contact against the spring pressure, and hence the moving contact is separated and the arc is struck. At the time of the high pressure air blast along the arc take away, ionize the gases, and since when the ionization process take place, so you can say that the arc is extinguished and the current flow is interrupted. So in this way, you can see that how this air blast circuit breaker in an axial type can operate. So only question is that thing, whenever there is a fault occur in the system, we see that whenever we have a fault in the system, so at that time your moving contacts are get separated with the fixed contact, and when it will be separated, so what will happen, there is an arc generated between the moving contact and the fixed contact. So you have to remove this arc. So the moment when these two contactors get separated, so the air valve gets open automatically, and when this air valve gets open automatically and this air valve is installed in the arcing chamber, so very high pressure of air is get enter into the arc in the same direction as the directions of the arc. So with the high pressure of this air, it helps to ionize the particles of the arc, and hence the arc will be extinguished and the current flow is interrupted. So in this way, you can say that your axial blast air circuit breaker can work. Okay. So here it will be have the contact separation required for the arc extinguish is very small. This small gap may sometimes inadequate clearance of the normal service voltage. So therefore, an isolating switch is included as a part of this circuit breaker. This switch opens immediately after the fault interruption to provide the necessary clearance of the insulation. So basically, these are, you can say that the disadvantages of your axial blast circuit breaker, because this axial blast circuit breaker is can be used for an arc generated with a very low capacity. The gap is sometimes very small. Therefore, we have to also include an isolating switch as a part of the circuit breaker. And also the switch opens immediately after the fault interruption to provide the necessary clearance for the insulation. So these are basically the three disadvantages of this axial blast air blast circuit breaker. Now coming to the quickly part, that is second, you can say that the classification of the air blast circuit breaker is basically the cross blast circuit breaker. Now you see, in case of cross blast circuit breaker, what will happen when the arc will generate between the moving contact as well as the fixed contact, a blast of the air is provided in perpendicular, or you can say that at a right angle to the direction of the arc. As far as air axial blast is concerned, the blast of the air is provided in the same direction as in the direction of the arc. But in case of cross blast, what will happen? The blast is air blast will be get perpendicular or at a right angle to the direction of the arc. So here it can be write down in this type of circuit breaker, an air blast is directly at a right angle to the arc. The cross blast lengthen and force the arc into a sustainable arc extinguishment. When the moving contact is withdrawn, arc is struck between the fixed and the moving contact. High pressure cross blast forces the arc into a small, you can say that arc splitters and baffles. These splitters serve to increase the length of the arc and also provides the cooling. This results in arc extinguishing and a flow of current is interrupted. So if we summarize all these things in a cross blast air circuit breaker, so what will happen in case of cross blast circuit breaker? When there is a high current flows through the circuit breaker, the moving contact gets separated from the fixed contacts when your electromagnetic coil or the electromagnetic coil get energized. When this electromagnetic coil get energized, it will give the directions to the fixed contact, and the fixed contact will be at same position, but the moving contacts are pulled apart. So when there is a moving contacts are pulled apart from the fixed contact and arc is struck between them, so you have to extinguish the arc in a minimum possible shortest time. So what will happen when the arc is generated between the moving contact and the fixed contact, so a blast of the air is provided with the help of again the air valve that is placed in a arc chamber. But only one thing here is that the blast is provided as a perpendicular direction, or the blast is provided at a 90-degree angle to the direction of the arc. So with this, what will happen when the blast is provided at a perpendicular direction to the arc path? So this splits the arc into number of ways, and this splitting helps us to increase the length of the arc, and also with the increase in the length of the arc resistance is also increases. And we know in my previous lecture I had discussed with you that when the resistance of the arc increases, the current will start reducing, and hence your heat generated inside the circuit breaker get also lower. So the same thing will happen when the high blast air is get passed at a perpendicular to the direction of the length of the arc. It will split the arc into the number of ways. With this, the length of the arc increases. So when the length of the arc increases, that means the resistance of the arc is also increases. But with the increase in the resistance, your arcing current time, or you can say that the arcing current can reduce, and hence your arc will be extinguished within a minimum possible shortest time. And also it will help to improve the cooling process. So this is the process that happen in case of a cross blast circuit breaker. So you can see the pictorial representation of here, that you have a fixed contact on the right hand side, you have a moving contacts on the left hand side. So in between these two red colored picture, that is a fixed contact and the moving contact, you have an arc generated, and you see from the bottom airflow will be passed, and when airflow will be passed, this arc will be splitters, and when the arc will splitters, the arcing resistance get increased, and with the increase in the arcing resistance, your current will reduce, and hence your arc will be extinguished within a minimum possible shortest time. So the Airblast circuit breaker has some advantages over the oil circuit breaker as written on that thing. Like number one, there is no chance of fire hazards caused by the oil. Since in case of an oil circuit breaker, we are basically used oil as a quenching media, oil as an insulating material. But since this oil is basically a chemical, so there will be sometimes there will be chances of the fire hazards occur. But in case of air blast, since no external media is taken up to extinguish the arc, so the chances of the fire hazard is very low, or you can say that the chances of the fire hazard is almost nil in case of air blast circuit breaker as compared to the oil blast circuit breaker. The breaking speed of the circuit breaker is very much higher as compared to the oil circuit breaker. So you can say that the breaking speed of circuit breaker is much higher during the operation of the air blast circuit breaker. So you can say that air blast circuit breaker can operate in a very fastest operation as compared to your in case of oil circuit breaker. Arc quenching is much faster during the operation of air blast circuit breaker. Arc is quenched very minimum possible shortest time. As I had already tell you in case of air blast circuit breaker that its mode of operation, its time of operation is little bit high as compared to air blast. The duration of the arc is same for all values of small as well as high current interruptions. As the duration of the arc is smaller, so lesser amount of heat realized from the arc to current carrying contact, hence the service life of contacts became longer. The stability of the system can be well maintained as it depends upon the speed of operation of the circuit breaker. And also air blast circuit breaker requires less maintenance as compared to your oil circuit breaker. So these are certain advantages of air blast circuit breaker as compared to oil circuit breaker. Okay. No doubt there are some disadvantages of air blast circuit breaker. Like in order to have frequent operation, it is necessary to have sufficiently high capacity air compressor. I had already tell you that in case of air blast circuit breaker, in order to provide the high blast of the air, we are required an air compressor. So this with the help of this air compressor, you can generate a high pressure of the air, and but for generating a high pressure of the air, you are required in compressor. So it will include the extra cost. It will include the extra equipment. And one thing more, that if there is a fault occur in any of the system, like if the fault occur in the compressor system, the whole of the system get interrupted. So this is the disadvantage of air blast circuit breaker. Frequent maintenance of the compressor associated with air pipes and automatic control equipment is also required. Due to high-speed current interruption, there is always a chances of rate of rise of restriking voltage and the current chopping. That what do you mean by this restriking voltage and the current chopping? That I will also discuss in later on stage. Okay. There are also chances of air pressure leakage from the air pipe junction. So if there is a pressure leakage, if there is a leakage in the pressure in the pipes that are installed between the circuit breaker and a air compressor chamber, so if there is a leakage occur in the pipe, so what will happen? The pressure is get reduced, and when the pressure is get reduced, this low amount of pressure is not just sufficient required to you can say that to help out to blast the arc within the circuit breaker. So these are certain, you can say that, air blast circuit breaker. So this is types of air blast circuit breaker. And one thing that I will tell you, that as I had discussed about 3 types of circuit breaker, that is called as the axial blast, the cross blast and the radial blast. So here we were discussed about the axial blast, we were discussed about the cross blast, but the radial blast is basically the combination of axial blast as well as the cross blast. So that is why particularly we are not discussing about the radial blast type. In case of radial blast type, what will happen, we are providing the arc in the same direction as in the direction of the, we are providing the high pressure air in the same direction as the direction of the arc. But in addition to that thing also, we are also providing high pressure air in perpendicular direction also. So you can say that if you combine the axial blast type as well as the cross blast type, the ultimately so circuit breaker obtained is called as your radial blast type. Okay, so this is all about your axial blast. What are the advantages, disadvantages? All about the cross blast. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages, and what are the various advantages of air blast circuit breaker over your oil circuit breaker, and what are the various disadvantages of air blast circuit breaker over oil circuit breaker. Okay, so in next lecture we will discuss about air brake circuit breaker. What will happen in case of an air brake circuit breaker? Okay ji. So this is all about for today's lecture. Now if you have any doubt related to the particular topic, you can ask me. Okay, so for today's attendance, your link for Google form will be shared in the chat box. All the students are requested to please mark the attendance before leaving the platform. So those who are marked their attendance, they can leave now. So thank you so much for today's lecture.